Theories of International Relations. Part 3. Topic: Marxism. Aims of the learning. Aims of the topic. 1. Locating Marxism as a branch of the philosophy of international relations (IR). 2. Introduces capitalism and the class system as the organizing principles of Marxism. 3. Consider important Marxist concepts and theories about the essence of international relations. 4. Apply Marxist concepts to examine the causes and consequences of the First World War. Learning goals. By the end of this topic, you will be able to learn: 1. Identify key terms and concepts associated with the Marxist approach to IR. 2. Discuss international affairs in terms of relations between the central, semi-peripheral, and peripheral states of the world capitalist system. 3. Explain how the emphasis of Marxism on economic relations varies from the viewpoints that liberalism and realism offer. Marxism Summary. 1. Marxist ideology has a historical legacy dating back to 1848, but it only became a dominant force in Western IR after the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. 2. Marxism interprets the world through the prism of historical materialism, in which all political events can be interpreted through an economic prism. 3. The guiding principle of Marxism is class struggle, which creates two distinct socio-economic classes within a capitalist economy, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. 4. Marxism is a significant example of an international political economy in IR by focusing on the relation between politics and economics. 5. Marxists see the state as a mask of bourgeois power and of national interest as a thin curtain to the interests of the rich and powerful class. 6. World system theory analyzes the connection between the rich core and the poor periphery of the world economy. 7. The focus of Marxism on class conflict allows it to carry out transnational analyses of the global bourgeoisie and proletariat that help explain how apparently different states can still cooperate in the interests of their wealthy rulers. 8. The First World War was described as an expression of competition over access to colonial resources and markets between bourgeois classes. 9. Despite the end of formal imperialism, uneven development continues to divide the world into a dominant center and subordinate periphery, whose main aim is to manufacture low-cost products for sale in core states to the proletarians. Introduction. When Karl Marx co-wrote the Communist Manifesto with Friedrich Engels in 1848, he had no idea that more than 150 years later his ideology would still influence the social sciences. Indeed, many proclaimed Marxism's demise. But Marxism remains a strong intellectual force. Indeed, the Soviet bloc collapse has opened new space for a Marxist analysis of international relations. As a result, over the last 2 decades, Marxist analysis has prospered. It has been recognized as a strong intellectual critique of capitalism, again the dominant form of economic organization in the world. Marxism, as opposed to liberal institutionalism or realism, focuses on the economic basis of international relations. It argues that the distribution of wealth has at least as much impact on IR as the relationships of political and military interest to liberals and realists. Many Marxists go even further, arguing that political outcomes are determined by economic relations. Marxism offers a strange and unsettling view of international relations. It focuses on the ways the poor around the world are oppressed by wealthy and powerful classes. It relegates states to secondary world importance, seeing them as representations of the socio-economic interests that control them. Marxism overturns many liberal and realist theories, shifting the direction of IR analysis and presenting a completely new image of international relations. Organizing principles of Marxism. The Marxist theory analyzes international relations from the point of view of relations among socio-economic classes. In contrast to the emphasis on political relationships of liberals and realists in an anarchic international setting. The primary guiding concept of Marxism is capitalism, the global system under which goods and services are generated and distributed on the basis of market relations. Capitalism has created two socio-economic classes in human terms, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Members of the bourgeoisie control the means of production, the systems by which goods are produced and distributed. This involves everything from the mines that extract resources to the factories that make finished products to the stores where they are sold. In comparison, the proletariat works for the bourgeoisie. The proletarians exchange their labor for a fixed wage which represents only a small fraction of their work's total value. The history of capitalism has been, according to Marx and his successors, a history of the struggle between these two socio-economic classes, with the proletariat unsuccessfully attempting to free itself from the bourgeoisie's economic dominance. Since economic reasons are preferred to political ones, the Marxist IR deals with a different set of issues than either liberalism or realism. Instead of focusing on human interaction in the political field, which deals with governance and policy problems, Marxism gives importance to economic sector interactions. Therefore it is associated with the International Political Economy (IPE), an IR branch that examines the relations between the political and economic systems of the world. While liberal institutionalism asks how to build a more peaceful world, and whereas realism asks why wars persist, Marxism asks the proletariat how to achieve emancipation. Marxists explain this empirical problem with a line of reasoning resembling John Locke's arguments. Marxists argue that an international order based on an unequal wealth distribution will prove unstable because it will enable the poor to overthrow the system that keeps them destitute. Marxism's aim is to create a society in which justice determines an equal distribution of wealth, leading to a society in which all individuals can attain their potential without the advantages or disadvantages that their position in the capitalist world system currently provides. Concepts and assumptions. Marxism has its philosophical origins in the 19th century. The economist Karl Marx and the industrialist and philosopher Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto in 1848, a brief pamphlet outlining their critique of the economic and political systems of Europe. It was, in Europe, a time of revolutionary change. Industrialization overthrew the centuries-old relationships that tied landowners to their tenant farmers, forcing vast numbers of landless poor people into cities where they had to find work in large and increasingly automated factories. At the cost of their workers, the owners of these factories became enormously rich, replacing aristocratic landowners as the most powerful social and economic class in society. To counter proletarian uprisings, the bourgeoisie bought their way into political power, passing legislation and using elements of state power. Their supremacy over the proletariat was thus strengthened by bourgeois control of the relations of production, including the law. The emphasis of Marxism on class struggle and economic relations over interstate rivalry and politics creates some interesting implications for IR study. Therefore, the national interest of a state is determined by the interest of its bourgeoisie, which makes the state a mask for its socio-economic class. To inspire the proletariat to fight on behalf of its bourgeois masters, states use the language of nationalism. Most of the works of Karl Marx contain a fully developed theory of international relations. Marxist IR developed when Marx's ideas were used by various scholars and practitioners to shed new light on different aspects of international relations. An example of Marx's ideas applied to IR can be found in the World System Theory by Emanuel Wallerstein. It looks at international relations by splitting the world into three types of state, each holding a specific position within the world economy. Core states are the home of the planet's wealthiest bourgeoisies. Their economies focus on high-value economic activities including banking and investment, allowing them to reap the rewards of world economic growth worldwide. Peripheral states depend on low-value activities such as subsistence agriculture and raw material production, leaving them with limited access to markets or economic growth benefits. It leaves their bourgeoisies comparatively poor and their proletariats much poorer, making them even more unstable at the core of the world capitalist system than the more prosperous states. Semi-peripheral states are situated between these extremes in a transitional zone. Some of these states have successfully transitioned into the core of the world capitalist system. This has brought their bourgeoisie into the top ranks of the global economic elite and made their proletariats more bearable in life. Thanks to the access to international capital and resources of the core countries, economic activity in the world capitalist system tends to reinforce the dominant international position of the core, leaving peripheral and semi-peripheral states to deal with the few remaining sources of capital. Marxists see economics as determining political and social outcomes. This uneven economic system is reflected in the uneven distribution of political and social power in the international community. The Marxist approach to IR analysis shares several assumptions with the theories that you already studied. Like realism, Marxism stresses the importance of power, defined as being capable of bending others to your will, positive power, or resisting the attempts of others to bend you, negative power. In both theories, the pursuit of power is seen as a primary force of international behavior. However, unlike realism, Marxism does not take as its principle of analysis the sovereign state. Marxism, as you have learned, prioritizes the socio-economic classes. States are simple masks that bourgeoisie use to strengthen their economic power. Even democratic, of the people, by the people and for the people, instead, they're of the bourgeoisie, by the bourgeoisie and for the bourgeoisie. Marxists believe states are behaving internationally to ensure access to resources and markets around the world for their elite. They act domestically to curb their national proletariat's rebellious tendencies, sometimes through coercion and sometimes by co-option, buying their loyalty from peripheral states with goods and services are taken. Like with liberal institutionalism, Marxism accepts as participants in IR a range of non-state actors. It also accepts the claim of liberalism that international actors are entwined in a global interdependent system, though Marxism identifies the international bourgeoisie as the primary beneficiaries of this interaction. Marxists, unlike liberals, have little confidence in the capacity of regimes and international organizations to improve proletarian standards in international society. After all, the states responsible for regime development are mere masks for the bourgeois classes who control them. Any regimes they create would, therefore, be designed to benefit their bourgeois masters. The proletariat will never receive an equal share of the benefits obtained by regime formation, increasing the bourgeoisie's dominance in the capitalist world system. Concept and assumptions. Key points. Marxist theory has an intellectual heritage that stretches back to 1848, but only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 it becomes a dominant force in Western IR. Marxism interprets the world through the prism of historical materialism, through which the economic prism can explain all political phenomena. The organizing principle of Marxism is the class conflict, which produces two distinct socio-economic groups within a capitalist economy, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Marxism is a significant example of the international political economy in IR, by focusing on the relation between politics and economics. Marxists see the state as a mask of bourgeois power and of national interest as a thin veil to the interests of the rich and powerful class. World system theory analyzes the connection between the wealthy core and the poor periphery of the world economy. Marxism and the First World War. The First World War leads directly to the first major use of Marxist theory for international analysis purposes. The person in charge was not a Foreign Office diplomat or from academia. It was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, known as Lenin. Lenin was a Marxist revolutionary in the early 20th century, and after the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 would become the first leader of the Soviet Union. A few months before the revolution swept him into power, Lenin wrote a brief pamphlet in which he tried to explain in Marxist terms the causes of the First World War. The pamphlet was called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Lenin argues that the interstate conflict that led to World War I was a result of the capitalist economic structure that had developed over the preceding century in the Western world. One of his key arguments is that world politics was fundamentally altered by dividing the world into separate sovereign states. State borders divide the global proletariat into different classes, allowing their elites to turn national proletariats against each other by using nationalism. Nationalism, Lenin explains, is simply a tool used by national bourgeoisies to turn the global proletariat against itself, convincing workers in the name of national interest to kill their fellow workers. Lenin opposed this use of nationalism to mask the bourgeois elite's true economic goals, imperial expansion that would guarantee their access to resources and markets. Lenin saw imperialist resource and market competition as the true cause of the First World War, an extension of capitalist competition to the international political stage. Marxism and First World War key points. 1. The First World War was explained as an act of competition over access to imperial resources and markets between bourgeois classes. 2. Despite the end of formal imperialism, unequal growth continues to divide the world into a dominant core and subordinate periphery. Conclusion of the topic. In the study of IR, the Marxist critique of international relations introduces a new element, economic determinism. As one approach to the study of international political economy, Marxism investigates ways of influencing the organization of the international political system through the distribution of economic power around the world. By doing so, it allows you to think about IR from a very different viewpoint. While liberalism and realism tend to see political interaction as more important than activity in other areas, Marxism argues, explaining political and social outcomes based on their relationship with the economic structures and processes from which they originate. Topic overview. Marxist theory has an intellectual heritage that stretches back to 1848, but only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. It has become a dominant force in Western IR. Marxism interprets the world through the prism of historical materialism, through which the economic prism can explain all political phenomena. The organizing principle of Marxism is a class conflict that produces two distinct socio-economic groups within a capitalist economy, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Marxism is an important example of the international political economy in IR by concentrating on the relationship between politics and economics. Marxists see the state as a mask of bourgeois power and of national interest as a thin veil to the interests of the rich and powerful class. The world system theory analyzes the relationship between the rich core and the poor periphery of the world economy. The focus of Marxism on class conflict helps it to carry out transnational analyses of the global bourgeoisie and proletariat that help explain how apparently different states can still cooperate in the interests of their wealthy rulers. The First World War was explained as an act of conflict for access to imperial resources and markets between bourgeois classes. Despite the end of formal imperialism, uneven development continues to divide the world into a dominant core and subordinate periphery. What we learned so far. 1. Defines key terms and concepts related to the Marxist approach in IR. 2. Discuss international affairs in the world capitalist system in terms of relations between core, semi-peripheral, and peripheral states. 3. Explain how Marxism focuses on economic relations differs from liberalist and realist perspectives. List of core concepts. Capitalism. Class. Means of production. Relations of production. Critical theory. Next topic, theory of constructivism in international relations. Thanks for watching.